Well, good evening, everybody. It's Chris here from the Whistle Stop Cafe in Muir, Alberta. I've got a special guest tonight, Cory Morgan from the Western Standard. He's been on the show before, and it's always a good time. Cory's got a lot to say. He also wrote this book that's right over my left shoulder that looks like my right shoulder on the screen, the Sovereigntist Handbook. If you haven't read it, read it. Buy it, read it. If you haven't the time to read it, buy the audiobook like I did and listen to it while you're driving. If you have questions about Alberta independence or anything around it, that is the book you need to read. I highly recommend it. So tonight, Cory and I are going to talk about some topics that come up around the idea of Alberta independence. And we're probably going to follow all sorts of different things because there's lots of shiny topics these days and there's a lot to talk about. So I hope you can put up with us or keep up with us. And please ask questions, comment. I do go through it. I put up whatever I can, and we deal with whatever we can in these little episodes. And it always helps kind of take us in the direction that you folks want to go. I know that there's probably more questions out there right now than answers, and our job or our goal is to get you connected with as many of those answers as we can so that you can make good decisions going forward, whether it comes to, politics or conversations with friends and family or things like that. So thanks for joining us. And without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Cory Morgan to the Chris Sands Kerry Show, because Kerry just got on an airplane.
Well, great to be back with you, Chris.
Yeah, Cory, you've been a really busy guy the last little bit. It seems like every day I see something going on, and it's more news fodder for you guys. Do you feel like it's a little more exciting these days than it has been in, say, the pre-2020 kind of thing?
Yeah, well, the world's, we both know, changed very dramatically since before 2020. It's become more unpredictable. I think a lot of us have learned we can make our predictions. I do it a lot, but I'm finding myself wrong quite often. Things are so fluid, and people have changed so much in their perspectives. I think the world's ready to embrace, new attitudes, new directions, but we're not quite sure how we're going to do it yet. So it's an exciting time, but it's quite a void ahead of us too.
Yeah, I've tried to stop asking, like, oh my goodness, what's next? Because the things that come next seem to be 10 years ago. If people had told me that the president of the United States would have to make a declaration on whether there's more than two sexes, I would have told them that they were insane. If someone had told me that our provincial government would have to get tomatoes thrown at them to protect children from ideological, delusional people who want to, harm them, I would have said, yeah, that's not going to happen. But here we are.
Yeah, I mean, every day it's watching that ideological battle. I mean, we're in a world where rationality has just been set aside. I mean, we can't even. It's controversial to say a boy's a boy and a girl's a girl. What happened?
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah, me neither. Maybe that's why these things have all kind of happened together. It's like the perfect storm for a mostly broadly conservative province like Alberta to stand up and say, you know what, we just don't want to go down this Looney Tune path. Maybe it's time for us to go our own way, and we're going to pursue truth, and we're going to act with moral purpose. And maybe we just don't have to do that. Do you think that might be part of why the Alberta independence movement has gained so much traction, or is it more because Alberta has realized that we can't get out from underneath a crazy Liberal government, as we saw with the election this spring?
It's a bit of both. I think some of it really does, as you mentioned, go back to 2020. I think so many people learned and realized and lost faith in the establishment, and suddenly a new mistrust was born that hasn't gone away. I mean, the COVID issue's gone, but the mistrust that was laid hasn't. And we've seen the establishment exposed, the academia, the entrenched politicians, the bureaucracies And now people aren't blindly accepting when they put out the absurd. So we're watching that battle going on, but look at the lunatics who are trying to fight this, who are saying that somehow it's a charter right for children to be mutilated, for gender reassignment surgery under the age of 18, or the unions as well. I mean, they're getting almost ridiculous with the shrill demands, but I think it's because they're realizing that their hold is slipping. People want change. They might not be sure what they want yet, but they know that they don't trust this group anymore. The independence movement used to kind of rise and lower. It would have its ebbs and flows. And now, no, it's just risen and it's staying there. In fact, it's growing. Uh, Brexit, looking over there, is another brilliant example, though. We saw, I mean, this was not so much COVID related, but this again was where the establishment was talking down to everybody. They were saying, just trust us, listen to us. You guys are misguided, you're intolerant, or all of the rest of the other ridiculousness. And the population stood up and said no. They gave them a collective middle finger and they voted and said we're out. I mean, that story's still kind of unfolding slowly and painfully, and it still seems like the UK may be lost, which is a separate discussion on the perils of mass immigration. Mm-hmm. But the world is in flux. And it runs all the way down, I think, to the independence movement. And that's why it's becoming so entrenched this time around. And I don't see it going away.
I don't either. On another note, just a little side note here, I actually took some time and I sent a couple things to our CA presidents, all the UCP CA presidents, and to the premier and some ministers. You mentioned unions with too much power. Now, I kind of have a bone to pick with unions because of what they're doing right now. It's completely ridiculous. It's very obviously weaponization of unions to work against one government to try and prop another incoming government, or they hope, up. So I thought, you know what, I'm gonna put my money where my mouth is, and I sent these to our CAs. One of them is an act to separate professional regulation from collective bargaining. So the ATA would no longer be the union and the professional regulator. And companion to that is an act to protect workers' freedom of association and choice, because they're screaming about charter rights and constitutional rights. And I say, yeah, let's give them their charter rights. Let's give them their constitutional right, their freedom of association, and the right to strike, which also means they're free to either be or not be part of a union. So I'll send you these after. You might get a kick out of it, and I'm hoping to see it talked about a little bit in the future. So nothing to do with what we're talking about tonight. I just thought of it.
It all kind of ties in. I mean, as I said, overpowered unions, and that's where these battle lines are being drawn. And I'm fully in agreement with you. I wrote a column not too long ago on right to work legislation too. We seem to forget, yes, there's a right for association as a union, but there must be a right not to associate. We don't have that that's now. Right. So I'm glad you sent it out.
Yep. And our premier, I know she's not perfect and I don't agree with everything she does, but in this case, I do know that she believes in rights and freedoms. They really bungled it with the Alberta Bill of Rights, but this is a really good opportunity for her to show that, yeah, she does believe in that, and actually lay the groundwork for an Alberta that maybe is not hamstrung by overpowered unions in the future. Anyhow, one of the major talking points that we see about Alberta independence is coming from Indian chiefs, specifically 6, 7, and 8, the chiefs that seem to pop up whenever government wants to do something that the federal government doesn't like. They end up showing up and expressing their outrage and dropping bills on the floor and things like that. So it got me thinking, what is it that these chiefs are trying to say that prevents the people of Alberta, through a democratic process, from saying, hey, we don't want to be under the crown anymore? They're trying to say that the treaties themselves would prevent Alberta from being independent. Now, you're kind of I would say a bit of an expert on the treaties. You've read them, you understand them. Do you want to maybe kind of explain what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, expert, there's a term that kind of makes people cringe because it gets so abused, but I've dug into treaties and those issues more than your average person has anyways, and certainly came to my conclusions with it. And for starters, people have there's been almost a mythology about the amount of power or authority that treaties bestow upon the First Nations bands. If you actually read them, they're relatively simple documents. You were saying you were digging into it too. So yeah, they're all online. They're not very long. And I mean, they were straightforward. Most of what they're based on is actually just talking about the boundaries of what a reserve is going to be. And then some lesser things like farm implements for band heads and chiefs, and some ongoing payments, education, which is a separate irony because that led to the residential schools. Uh, but there's nothing about a veto power over things that are happening outside of the reserves. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's typically talking about a full surrender of all properties and lands outside of that reserve, and surrender to any title or say over the disposition of those lands. What we're seeing now is a lot of stuff that's been read in by activist judges, or sometimes stuff that's just outright fiction. When it talks about the difference between consultation and consent, there's where we get a lot of confusion too. We have a constitutionally entrenched obligation to consult First Nations people with projects and things that have impact them, but we don't need their consent. And that has actually been ruled on by the Supreme Court over and over and over again. If you search that one out, Supreme Court rulings on consultation versus consent, you'll find that this question has been asked many times, and no, they do not have a veto authority over projects. Likewise, they don't have a veto authority over independence. Now, where it can get sticky, though, the treaty land, the reserve land itself, that's theirs. That's fine. The worst I could see is it actually turns into a partition situation then, where there are going to be some sort of strange little sovereign spots or Canadian properties within the province. I don't think, in an independent situation, I think things would be negotiated to a better outcome than that. If the independence movement or the government was proposing to dissolve those reserves or take that land or do anything that was expressly against those treaties, then they would have a valid case. I mean, then we've got a problem. But there's nothing in the straight out independence movement, the straight out question saying, do we want to leave the Federation that treaties override? None whatsoever. The chiefs, remember, the chiefs are the main beneficiaries of the status quo right now, and some senior bureaucrats and some lawyers. For the most part, the First Nations people are not doing very well whatsoever under this system, particularly the ones who live on the reserves. And
statistics are just horrendous.
Oh, it's awful. And they're jealously guarding that. And they really don't want people to see that. As you might be familiar, I mean, I got charged by the Siksika Reserve with trespassing for going out and shooting a video from public highways and roads showing the conditions of the reserve, because the houses are falling apart, the wild dogs are running around, the trash is everywhere, the people are in terrible disorder. And this is a reserve that got $1.3 billion from Trudeau in 2017. So the question's got to be asked, well, what the heck happened to it? But rather than try to be accountable, they're trying to close it in. The chiefs, the councils, they're trying to keep people out, keep the information out, and again, try to practice that false authority that they have. When we saw them having their press conferences and yes, throwing policies on the ground and things like that, it's performative, but they don't have that kind of authority to stop the independence movement. I think just morally, they're Alberta citizens. We should be consulting as much as possible and including the First Nations people in this movement. But we also can't just leave it to so many people saying, well, you can't have the movement without their permission, because it's just not true. And that's just got to be put to rest. That's not true.
Yeah, and the idea, you hear this all the time. Well, it's treaty land. Yeah, it is treaty land in that the treaty Indians under those treaties are guaranteed access to hunt and fish in these territories. That was it. There's two things that really stood out in the treaties to me. The first one is, now, when you look at this from a perspective of the claim of a sovereign nation, the treaties are made a sovereign nation to a sovereign nation. Those treaty Indians don't own the reserves. The federal government owns those reserves. Like, it literally says that they're going to set aside a reserve of land and they outline the boundaries and stuff like that for those people. So it still belongs to the crown. It's not even theirs. And that just completely blew my mind. That was the first part.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, nobody likes to talk about that, particularly among those in the reserves. I like to think the spirit of it says that that's the property of the people who live there now. But technically, if you're going to look at those treaties as they were, no, it is. It's just it's not their land any more than a national park is. It's
Yeah.
government land that has some strong regulations and controls on it. Uh, as well, I mean, we could get deeper into the issues and problems and challenges with the fact that the people on there don't have property rights and can't build asset bases like everybody else can, and establish
Can't use the
themselves
land as
as
collateral for a loan for a startup or anything.
exactly. So that's really, really held a lot of people behind because there are a lot of ambitious people on the reserves. Uh, I understand the agonies of owning a pub and a restaurant and a cafe as you do, and it's certainly not the path to easy money. And when Jane and I got the pub here in Prentice when we owned it for a few years, the way we purchased it, we had to leverage our house to buy that. No bank was going to lend money for a service industry business. It's not going to happen. We had to risk our own asset. So that was a means that we could build up equity over decades of working and paying in so we could have that. There's no mechanism for that for people on the reserves because, as you said, that property isn't even the collective property of the bands technically, much less individual pieces of property that could be used for collateral, which is a lot of the root of that whole dysfunction of that entire system for them.
Yeah, and it's yeah, it becomes painfully obvious the problems of only having custodial like guardianship of land and not ownership in that way. So the second thing, and this is really relevant considering what we're seeing from the chiefs today, is that it appears to me that the vast majority of Indians in North America didn't actually govern with a chief and headman type system. It seems like they governed more of like a council with the advice of elders, those types of things, more communal governance. And when I started to peel that back, I found that when these treaties were signed, the British Crown actually set up the treaty Indians with chiefs, and they imposed a council and chief kind of to mirror British Parliament. And then, if you look in the treaties, and folks, I would encourage this, you can find them online. I actually posted the link to Treaty 6 in the comments there. If you go and look in there, it says that the chiefs get $25 per year, the headmen get $15 or $10 per year, and the members get $5 per year. So right off the bat, they set up a reward and position scheme, just like colonial England did when they were putting governors everywhere and all over the world. Pretty much, they set these guys up. They paid them more to keep control of those people, and the same thing was done to treaty Indians all over Canada. And the way it's worked out now is that it seems, now I haven't seen the books, but it seems to me like an upper echelon of elite benefit tremendously from the gifts of the crown, and the average person, they're living an average of 12 years less than people who live off reserve.
Yeah, and actually, when you break that down by gender, in Alberta, the average man is 19 years less than a
Jeez.
person off of a reserve. 19 years. This should be making international news. And I encourage everybody, that sounds crazy. Google it. This came out just a minor story a couple years ago, but holy cow, they're dying 19 years less. The fentanyl crisis has a lot to do with that. That's why it's hitting young men so badly, but and throwing that average down so heavily. But it does show some of the socioeconomic disaster that's going on these reserves and off reserve. And yeah, that the irony of this is a colonial mechanism of leadership they gave it, though there was no other way to do it. I mean, as you've been looking back, I mean, how else? They didn't have advanced governance systems. There's nothing against them, but it was a nomadic culture with no written language. It's not like you could have Robert's Rules of Order or a constitution that would always make for the exchange of leadership within different bands that move, or different tribes when you're getting on a larger scale. It was based on oral history and tradition, and unfortunately, a heck of a lot of infighting, because when you don't have that established order to govern an area, things can be a little rough. So they brought that system in, and we've gone through that whole evolution. I mean, they were patronized terribly. There wasn't that long ago where natives weren't allowed to leave the reserve without signing out with an Indian agent, which is pretty, quite an infringement on rights for mobility and doing things. And they weren't allowed to vote until later. It was all wrong. But we've gone the other way now and given all of this authority. I wrote a piece on that recently. We've given all this authority to First Nations reserves, but none of the responsibility. I mean, Trudeau was a big part of that when he took away the ability to even audit the books on his reserves. A municipality has to be audited. A provincial government has an auditor general who, one just raked the Smith government over the coals. There's no oversight on these reserves. Yet at the same time, nobody's allowed to go in and do anything on them without going through those upper echelons that have been created with that chief and council. It's a recipe for corruption. And I mean, it varies reserve by reserve, but let's face it, corruption is rife and rampant, as well as incompetency and many other issues. We're seeing that in the Cowichan Reserve. Look at that garbage pile. 300,000 cubic meters. Actually, I think it was closer to 400,000 of trash that have been dumped over years. I mean, that's dump trucks going by, thousands of dump trucks past the council building to get to this dump. And now they turn around and say it's the federal government's responsibility to clean up, which might come into the tens or maybe even over $100 million. Again, all of the authority, because nobody else was able to go in there and look at it and stop this, but none of the accountability. Suddenly it's everybody else's fault. This is just a very, very backward system. And the ones losing the most are the First Nation citizens on the ground. Again, they're living in squalor in a dysfunctional semi-banditry type states with some of these places with these chiefs and councils, and no real accountability to help them. It's bad.
There might be some of you out there looking at my pasty white skin and thinking, why is Chris talking about this? He's a different race. Well, I'm not. I'm a human, and so are they, and I actually care. And to be honest, I didn't really start looking into some of these things until I was trying to search for answers on how an independent Alberta could benefit everybody, including First Nations people. That's why I started looking into this. But what would you say to people that say, "Oh, you can't talk about this, Cory. You're not an Indian. You don't have any right or standing to talk about these things"?
Well, I liked your approach. We're all humans, and we got to get past that. In fact, race-based policy is wrong. It's always wrong. It was wrong when people were stuffed on reserves, and it's wrong now when we're trying to fix and undo past problems through race-based policy. It's failing. And to try and say you can't speak to that because you're not that race, well, that's the height of racism. That's the height of race-based policy. And I can't be indifferent to seeing this sort of conditions and things happening within the same province with my fellow citizens. Likewise, I would speak to issues of cultural problems happening with people of different races that have been coming into Alberta and Canada as well. We have to be able to speak to these things. That's just a way to try and shut down discourse. And it is disingenuous to do so, to say that only Native people can speak to those issues. If, and I don't want to see this happen, but if we really want to play that game, really get to what some people are saying, that these are truly sovereign nations and they shouldn't nobody else should be able to say a single thing about them or over it. That's fine. Give them full sovereign nation status. It means you tax your own people, you raise your own funds, you put up your own borders, you run your own schools, you dig your own water wells, you build your own roads. Because that's there's that pretending that they're a sovereign nation, yet at the same time having none of the actual responsibilities of one. And so it's a pretending that, oh, well, you don't live on the reserve, so you have no authority to speak about it. Well, that's a load of BS. I'm sorry. We are interlinked. We are entrenched. And if you want to put it just to the cold hard cash part, as a taxpayer, we've got to fund these things. So I want to see value for dollar for the people on the ground on the other end of that then. And as another fellow human being as well, to live in a province where we have so much resources, so much potential, and we have, a category of people dying 19 years younger than everybody else, we better bloody speak up.
And nobody talks about it. I didn't know that until this year.
No, and like I said, this should be making international news. But the problem is when they scrape down into it, it's not due to the activists, the woke. When they're horrified by that when they look at it, but then they realize that these problems are much deeper than just throwing money at it. They'll just put it aside. Then they don't want to think about it. They don't want to talk about it. I mean, it's a complicated mess. As I said, fentanyl is the main thing that's knocking it down, but it's also malnutrition, higher cancer rates, suicide rates. And again, so it shows how miserably people are living. Their suicide rates are through the roof. Domestic violence, household fires, you name it, every single category.
Like 40% higher than off reserve.
Yeah,
or something like
it's
that.
Terrible. It's terrible, which again shows that's when I like to remind people too that nobody's winning. The citizens living on the ground in these reserves are not winning. Many of them are living in just terrible, terrible conditions. They're not happy. The conflict that's happening within the communities, the crime, the addiction, it's a terrible state of affairs. And yes, nobody likes to talk about it because the solutions are tough. And part of the solutions are accepting this reserve system is a failure.
We need to start talking about it, and now's a perfect time because we're potentially going to make some major changes in Alberta, and this would be the single greatest opportunity to elevate an entire group of people out of those statistics and bring them like full seats at the table and moving together to moving to prosperity together. That's why I believe it's so important to talk about this thing in the context of an independent Alberta, because it's not just a reset for Albertans. It's not just a reset for non-native Albertans. It's a reset for every Albertan, including the ones that are living in those conditions under those statistics. And Cory, you had Dallas Brody on your show today. You said before we came on here, Dallas Brody and Francis Widdowson and Jim McMurtry, who will be on tomorrow. Jim McMurtry's on tomorrow, 8 p.m., folks. They've been traveling around British Columbia and speaking at universities about the truth about residential schools. And what they've been encountering and what I've seen online is a group of young people who are so programmed to be ashamed of themselves that they're actually endorsing British Columbia handing the entire province back to Indian bands there. What do you think of that?
I think it's madness. And this absurdity of, unceded means everything is actually going to go back to a default of being Indigenous title and we have to return it to them. This ridiculous decolonization movement or land back movement. We got to get realistic. I think people should look again at Cowich, and I got to keep poking at them, but come on, guys, you made a recent example and a pretty bloody ugly one, but fair enough. How big a garbage dump do you want? Unless you're going to change the system, adding more property to this broken system is not going to put anybody in better shape. It's just going to make bigger Indian reserves. And we need truth. And it would be attitudes of not just the white woke, I guess you could say, which are a lot of these young people who foolishly think there's this weird colonial settler system that we need to undo. But looking at the attitudes of the young First Nations people when they come out to scream at Francis Widdowson, when she went to Winnipeg, or when she was in Thompson's Rivers with Jim, this is petulance. This is a culture that's been infantilized. They'll get on my case for saying it, but this is the truth. Look at it, they're acting like children. But that's because they've been treated like children. They haven't been equal partners. They've been dependencies, again, that were given all the time, no responsibility, but all of this authority. And one of the things children hate are truths that don't gel with what they'd like to think. And part of what Jim and Dallas and Francis have all been going out and exposing, just one hard truth, but it's a big one. And that's, right off the bat is the hoax of the Kamloops children buried at the Indigenous residential school.
And yes, that was a hoax, folks.
Absolutely. And I'll use that term and I'll keep using it. You don't like it, dig a hole. Prove me wrong. And when we're seeing, it used to be perhaps I could say it was a mistake or something, but now when we see $12 million having gone to a group of people to get to the truth of this, and they, again, no accountability, the money vanished, no outcome. Now we're into hoax territory. In fact, possibly fraud. We need to get to the truth of that.
There was an 8-year RCMP investigation, and they wanted to find things because they want more things to shame and guilt people with. There was an 8-year investigation, and there was one murder uncovered, at least beyond a reasonable doubt. And it was a white woman who murdered her or tried to murder her baby at one of the schools. They didn't find anything, not one thing. And now I'm kind of getting off topic, but I want people to understand what's happened during the period of the Open for Summer, Open for Good. You all must remember that the newspapers flipped a switch. It was done. There was zero COVID reporting. and it was all 215 bodies found at a residential school in Kamloops. A month later, there was a retraction that said, well, it was actually 215 anomalies. We don't really know what it is. It could be stumps or rocks or whatever. We just said that. But that completely took the entire country. It was like a complete shitstorm. Everybody was talking about this. There was movements. There was orange everywhere. People were mobilizing like crazy, talking about these things. And how dare the government do this? They're burning down churches with zero evidence. None. And this is right in the middle, right towards the end of an 8-year RCMP investigation that found none of that occurred. Yes, bad things happened. Kids died. Of course they did. They died all over Europe as well. They were abused all over Europe as well. Those things happened. I'm not saying they didn't. But the narrative was that Canadians need to be ashamed. Now we need to bring in UNDRIP, and we need to make sure that all of our laws that we enact are in accordance with the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. And now British Columbia is getting given away.
Oh yeah, the consequences are going to hit hard. But there are millions of non-native people in British Columbia who own property. The question is going to be, how far is this going to get before people really push back? And I mean really push back. When they're going to lose everything that they've worked for, built, and sat on. Some people are not just going to step aside. This is going to get really ugly if some sense doesn't start being injected into this mix. And the majority will win out in the long run, but I'd rather it done legislatively and peacefully rather than what might happen if you actually start moving on people's properties, as it seems to be the direction that things are going in. And that division, that anger, that the problems with part of why I get so upset, I'm so hung up on the Kamloops thing too, was because when those first reports came out, it took me in too for a few days at least. Like I looked, this is horrible. Oh my Lord, what happened? How did this possibly happen? Because it was reported as bodies. Excuse me. I initially thought, well, they really found some, and something really has to be, investigated and sorted out here. And it didn't take long when we realized that, well, they're not even going to dig holes. Because I mean, at a murder scene, you don't even wait more than a week or two. You dig holes and get on with it. That's
they refused to. And they said they never will.
No, and that's when the BS detector started going off. Like, okay, well, this didn't happen. I mean, there's some of the hoaxes too. People saying, well, the RCMP need the permission of the band to go there. No, they don't. They can. These aren't little countries, guys. They're bound by the same laws as everybody else. If the RCMP really thought there were bodies there, murdered bodies, they would dig, and there's nothing anybody could do to stop them. The only reason they aren't digging is because they know there's no bodies there. And look what it's done to the people who believe it, though. And that's part of that petulance, that anger, those protests we're seeing. Some of the young First Nations people who just aren't looking any farther than that. And they really do believe that hundreds of children were tortured, abused, and buried outside of the Kamloops residential school. Well, of course they're upset. And of course they're angry. That's all the more reason to resolve this. And the other thing is, too, as more and more Canadians, and we're not seeing much in the media as well, they're not pushing back on the deniers as much. It's mostly just NDP and activists who are doing so. Mostly we're seeing silence on this. But it undercuts some of the real things that happened on some of the other school sites, because you have difficulty believing those when you're maintaining this BS. When I was talking to Brody today, I brought up from Israel. I had the opportunity actually to meet the reporter who first reported it on October 7th. She was there a couple of days later, and there were IDF soldiers that came in, and one of them had told her that 40 babies had been decapitated in it's a Kafarazah. It was a kibbutz that I went on to as well. It was pretty horrible what happened there. But
this Cory was in Israel, and that's what we're talking about here now, folks.
Yes, yeah, and it turned out though within a couple of days that no, there was no 40 babies decapitated. That didn't happen. It was a rumor from a soldier. The reporter was a young girl who just really should have checked her sources more carefully before getting it out there. But right off the bat now, when there was misinformation and exaggeration in this, it made people question a lot of the horrors, and there were all kinds of horrors committed on October 7th. But now people are wondering which ones are the truth and which aren't anymore, because that first one went out that wasn't true. And it undercuts the gravity of what happened with the real atrocities, because there really were children murdered, there really was a whole music festival slaughtered, there really was a lot of bad things. But now that 40 babies myth was out there to start with, people started questioning a lot of it. Likewise, we got a myth of 215 murdered children in Kamloops. There could be real claims of real things that happened with some nasty dudes in residential schools in past years, but everybody's going to look at it with a jaundiced eye because, well, that was all a bunch of BS in Kamloops. How am I supposed to believe this next one? We've got to get to the truth of this. And in some cases, it might increase the truth of real claims somewhere else. But right now, it's making people doubt everything. So this is making things worse, and it's got to be resolved. We can't just leave it hanging there.
And it's causing a divide now, because we're literally looking at a wedge driven so deeply between two groups of people that they're actually like losing property, or potentially losing property. And you kind of alluded to it, but when a very large group of people has their personal sovereignty threatened by a small group of people, it generally doesn't go very well. So in this case, it is really important that people actually pursue the truth. One interesting thing that I didn't know until probably my late 30s or early 40s, when we settled in the West here, we encountered civilizations that had been just about completely wiped out by disease from the previous 250 years. Nomadic tribes following food lost up to 95% of the American Indians across North America in that period of time. You look at, and I didn't know this until I was at the Campbell River Museum on Vancouver Island, and I was reading about, I guess, George Vancouver, his logbook, and he describes meeting the townspeople of these villages, these Indian villages, and he describes bodies piled in the streets, like a massive sickness went through these people and just wiped a bunch of them out. So I never learned that in school. I never learned that the part of the deal with the treaties, the residential school thing, was a request from those people, because they knew that the world was changing. They wanted to be part of the new world and learn how to be part of it. And that's why they asked for schools. They asked for schools on each reserve. They asked for a medicine chest, which was, kind of like a doctor or nurse or whatever, amongst other things. But they wanted to survive. They wanted to integrate into the new world because they knew that's the way it was going. And there was a lot of really good people back then who worked really hard to try and make that happen. And as much as it is weird for me to say it, you know this too, Cory. Mark Carney's father was actually one of the top residential school authorities in Northern Alberta, and he was like, they loved him. He was great. He was a great guy for that kind of thing.
Oh, yes, I mean, and again, I don't deny and I don't doubt. Unfortunately, nasty people find their way into situations of authority so they can get to people. It happens. It's happened in church situations with non-native kids, or Boy Scouts, you name it. Unfortunately, some of that's happened in some places, but the vast majority of the nuns, the priests of the time, wanted to do what they felt was best for the time, for the kids, to bring them up and prepare them for the outside world. That meant speaking good English. That meant reading and writing. And the standards of teaching back then were, and in every school, considered what would be cruel today. I mean, our parents talked about getting a yardstick slammed across their knuckles if they misbehaved in class, or, pulled by the ear out of the room. Those things happened. That was the standard way of doing things. We don't do that anymore, but you can't measure the actions, the disciplinary means of those days and those circumstances with the lens of what we do today. It's totally unfair. It's unfair to the people managing these places. I'm sure they were educated people. There were easier lots in life they could have taken than managing a school on an isolated reserve. They really wanted to make things better, even if some of them failed. Might not have been as good as others, but some were probably very, very good at what they were doing for the kids there. And again, that broad brush gets painted, and demonizing of all of those people who took part in that system is just so wrong. And again, adding more division. And it does get troublesome when they're talking about legislation that denialist crap that the NDP wants to put out. It talks about having somebody charged for even implying that there was anything good in those schools. And I think the schools, the way they were done, was a bad idea. But let's not lie that there were some who came out of those schools and said it did them some good. And there were many, if not most of the people working in those schools wanted to do the best they could for those kids.
I had that idea that it was all bad, terrible, cultural genocide, as the Supreme Court actually said. And I was at an APP meeting in, I want to say Picture Butte, somewhere in southern Alberta. And I was talking to this old, like, grizzled cowboy who was also an Indian. And he was at the APP meeting and he wanted an independent Alberta. And I said, I can see why it would be attractive for First Nations people to want to have something different. I mean, look at the way the government treated you. Look at what they did to you in the residential schools. And he said, hold on a sec there, son. His exact words. This guy probably was 90 years old. He said, what makes you think it was all bad? He went to a residential school and he said, no, we wanted to go because we wanted to learn. And that was how we learned. And, his parents, they were some of the originals. They wanted to go and they were excited to go because they were learning how to exist in the new world. And he shared so much like positive feedback from that education that he got. It completely rocked my world, because I had made the emotional decision that it was all bad. It was all horrible. The government's always been bad to everybody. And this guy who was actually there, he had to set me straight. So that was a real wake up call for me.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I can understand some of the bad memories kids had if they were sent by the parents. I think the parents often had a lot of the foresight to send the kids. They're a little older, realizing things. As a kid, you're getting sent away from home. It's a rough experience. I went to a boarding school, certainly nothing like a residential school. I went to Shawnigan Lake School on Vancouver Island. It was traumatic, as it was all boys, and I was 14 and, really wanting to learn about girls at that point and had no access, but whatever, that's a side story. But as a kid, separated from your parents, your family, and over a distance, it sucks. It's miserable. It was a highly disciplined school. There's those old boarding schools. I mean, the bullying between other boys and students is rough. Not everybody will have a fond memory of it, even if I look back. I mean, some of the classical education, some of the reading, the abilities I have now are due to that high discipline environment at that school. But I didn't enjoy it at the time. And it'd be pretty easy to categorize it. My brain is nothing but a negative, is nothing but a horrible time, and try to envision all the masters at the school who taught as evil authoritarian jerks who were just constantly on my case. But that's not what it really was. That's just a child's vision of it, or a youth's vision of it. So I think that those seeds from then too also got expanded. Not every kid who came out of school enjoyed it or appreciated it until maybe later in life, or maybe never, because people, when they came out later, people were telling them, well, you're not supposed to appreciate that. You're supposed to talk about how horrible it was. You're supposed to embrace a sense of victimhood. And if you look for that sort of sense, you'll start believing it, unfortunately. And again, exaggerating a lot of the problems that happened there.
And neither of us are saying that there weren't bad things that happened. Of course there were, and I would never argue with someone that said something horrible happened to them in that case. But what I have a problem with is those things being used to shame and guilt people that have nothing to do with it, in order to promote an agenda that is in nobody's best interest. So we started talking about this from the perspective of an independent Alberta, and we kind of got sidetracked a little bit, because in this topic it's really easy to do. But my vision is that because things weren't done correctly or as best as they could have been before, it's resulted in a bad situation for an entire group of people, and it seems like there's no way out. I say we need to do something different, and we need to do that something different together. And that's where an independent Alberta comes in. One of the things that I just learned was that the Supreme Court recently ruled, I think 2023, or maybe it was earlier, maybe it was 2017, that oral tradition, record keeping from First Nations is recognized as with equal weight as written contracts. So now what's happened is some of the elders in the First Nations groups are saying, well, no, my grandpa said that this is what they agreed to, and we're going on that. Now, there's no written record of that. That tells me that something wasn't done right at that time by maybe one or both parties. So we need to do something different now. And I say an independent Alberta that elevates everybody to the same level is not only a fantastic idea, but it's morally required now.
Well, absolutely, and yeah, the oral history thing is a separate problem altogether. But you do have to make an accommodation for a culture that never had a written one. I mean, you got to try, but you still can't give it the same weight as a written record, though. We can't. It's just ridiculous. Again, what I envision in an independent Alberta and bringing people to the same level. I read a bit about that in the book. I mean, I really like the Swiss system, so I point to that one because it's decentralized and very much so. So that Switzerland, I mean, a very small country, landlocked, 26 cantons. So they're like little provinces within the Swiss government. Federally, very, very minor. It doesn't do very much at all. It actually takes care of the postal system and currency and foreign affairs and the military, things that a federal authority needs to do. Otherwise, everything's dropped down to those local levels. They got 4 official languages there. They've got very different governments in all 26 of those cantons. Some have a high population density, some are low. As I said, there's 4 different languages. If you listen to an authoritarian who believes in centralized government, they would have thought that country should have exploded into 26 pieces 200 years ago. Instead, it's one of the most stable nations on earth. And that's because they recognize the autonomy of those groups within a bound nation altogether, and they've decentralized the leadership. The First Nations, the reserves, can be cantons of their own. They can have that same authority and responsibility. That gets that harder part, but as every other one of those groups. Like, we don't want to bring in another centrally controlled system. If we became independent, that'd be insane. We'd just be making a smaller unit of what we left, where all the power stays in Edmonton, and they're cracking down on Grand Prairie or Lethbridge or Red Deer or Calgary because they have that central authority. You have to have a government that recognizes the cultural differences, possibly linguistic differences, or even political differences to those different regions and zones, and lets them practice it without central interference. And that can very much apply to the Indian reserves, and again, respecting and giving them the authority that they deserve. But again, there'd have to be a system of responsibility too.
So here's the $1 million question. Actually, it's like a $1.7 billion question. How do we bring First Nations in Alberta on board to become a sovereign Alberta with us?
I don't know. It's 3 words I hate saying, but I got to say them once in a while. I don't know. I mean, you and I have both been to countless meetings, town halls, things like that. We see the odd Indigenous people show up at those and participate, but they're pretty rare and rarely from a reserve. They're usually off reserve First Nations folks. We need outreach. We need to convince, we need to somehow bypass the gatekeepers, the chiefs, and talk to the citizens. But as they're closing those gates right now, they're making it harder. As I said, I'm dealing with trespassing charges just for shooting video off of a public highway. They're putting up more and more signs saying no trespassing under any circumstances. How do you even reach the people to chat with them one-on-one on the reserves? And as they're becoming more and more socially dysfunctional on the reserves, they're not really thinking about politics as much. They've got much more pressing immediate issues around their place to deal with because they're in a real troubled situation. So they need to be brought on board somehow. I got a feeling it would be more in a post-independent situation than a pre, though I think we should reach out as much as humanly possible to get the participation, input, and cooperation. But I don't know how much we'll succeed in that and how much we could dedicate to that when we really have to win over the majority of the rest of the province.
I think I agree with the post-independence thing. I think that as governor of the province of East Central Alberta in an independent Alberta, I think one of the things that I would consider is maybe we encourage chiefs and council to give their decision-making authority back to the people. Maybe we say, hey, you guys, we're going to give you your pension. You retire gracefully. We're going to we're going to work with your people, and we're going to get to a point where everyone's out of this rut. And I imagine there will be some that say, no way, you're trying to threaten our sovereignty. No, really what we're trying to do is elevate your people. And then we say, okay, well, if you don't want your pension, maybe we do a joint audit with the Band Council and the government of Alberta, and we expose everything that's going on and show people where this $1.7 billion went while they're living in squalor, and see how that goes. Maybe you're right. Maybe it is a post independence thing, but it doesn't prevent independence.
No, and that's kind of where we started with, right? There's not that veto. There's not that relationship. I mean, as you pointed out, when we talk about this all being treaty territory, and then the only amount of claim that's in there to Crown land area is hunting and fishing rights. Otherwise, the language is very clear in the treaties. Yes, we're on treaty land. It annoys people when I have that in my X profile, but I say I'm on permanently ceded territory. The treaties make it clear that everything else isn't their land anymore. Very much so. There's no ambiguity about that. They made a point of making it clear: forever cede, permanently surrender this land. So we'll work with the land that's already surrendered. There's a big issue of all the people living on that land that hasn't been. That's their treaty. That's the treaty land. And as I said, I don't know the best way to deal with it, but it will have to be dealt with. And we really just want them to be living prosperously and happily like the rest of everybody else potentially can. And bringing them in to participate is going to be essential. But I don't know if we'll be able to do it prior to independence. It might have to be a post sort of thing. And with some audits, with the bad actors being flushed out, maybe there'll be a lot more appetite on the part of the people on the ground to start taking part in something new.
Oh, I really think there would be, because the truth tends to motivate people, and it really, in this case, I believe it would set them free. Another interesting thing about the treaties is that it guarantees access for hunting, fishing, those types of things. But there's a stipulation in there that says, except where it would interfere with a settlement. So I think there was some foresight there that, we're going to grow, we're going to have big cities, and we don't want to just have, people doing whatever they want there. So as we grow, you kind of lose that access. And this is a really contentious point right now with Treaty 8 or 5. I can't remember. The one that straddles Alberta and BC. There's a big development there. And now the Treaty Indians are taking the government or the municipality to court over it. It's a pretty big deal.
There's so many cases going on. It's hard to keep track of them all. I think it's Treaty 8 up north that comes across, and
I'm pretty sure it
goes into northern BC. But yeah, that's another area that's going to be ongoing conflict. I mean, I think some of it, we got to face some realities and modernize these treaties a little bit too, and the intent.
Yep.
Let's face it, hunting is a traditional hobby at best now. It's very rarely a case of a sustenance requirement, and some people are dependent on it. I worked up in Inuvik, and up there, the caribou is very important to the people up there to fill their freezer every year, and so that they can maintain their budget. But in reality, the vast majority of the people on the reserves aren't hunting anymore, or if they are, it's just recreationally like anybody else. And to look at those rights as something that would override the development or ownership of other pieces of property is really not being realistic in a modern world.
And was the intention of the treaties really to have, 60-foot seiners gill netting across the entire mouth of the river and then selling salmon on the dock to anybody who passes by? That's not the intention. In Campbell River, people are pretty hot, but nobody wants to say anything because racism, right? One of the Indian bands there, they just got a multi-million-dollar grant to put pilings at the mouth of the Campbell River so they can stretch massive nets across when the salmon are running and net like that. The government's paying for it. Traditional fishing, right?
And then when the salmon stocks crash, which they will, because spawning is pretty essential for them, it'll be blamed on climate change and global warming, and we'll shut down more viable industrial projects to compensate for it.
Of course.
As you said, the spirit of those treaties, I was talking about hunting access even here in Alberta interior, that's because the people then were very reliant on it. I mean, they were still very much a hunting culture. You needed that to survive to pay your bills, to feed the family. Uh, Likewise, on the East Coast, we saw that with the lobster fisher, out there with the fishery they were going out. They didn't have boats and lobster traps and all that stuff. I'm sorry, let's be honest about it. Most natives back 300 years ago, if they ate a lobster, it's because one washed up on shore half alive. They weren't commercially fishing the things. Those treaty intentions were for people to sustain their families and have sustenance type of harvesting and hunting. And they are frankly obsolete now. And to expand them into business scaled level like that, again, when there's no accountability and oversight, is really going to cause a lot of environmental damage, not to mention economic. Likewise, when not giving oversight, when somebody wants to open a little unregulated garbage dump in the Cowichan area.
So there's two, well, at least two distinctly and probably equally relevant things going on here. The first one is that people are being made to feel guilty and ashamed of things that may or may not have happened in the past, and they're capitulating to that and agreeing to just act irrationally to nobody's benefit. And on the other hand, there's a group of people who I believe are really benefiting from this, and that is, anybody in upper, the upper echelons of power in the bands. The federal government sure benefits because they at any given time there's over 300 active cases open from Indian bands against the federal government. And so if the federal government wants to buy favor like they did in 2017, all they have to do is settle a $1.7 billion lawsuit and dole out a bunch of cash, right? So that's benefiting someone. And then the rest of us, the average Joe, on both sides of the reserve line, are the ones paying the price.
Okay, all these settlements never end. They never stop. That was something that Frances Widdowson, she wrote a book. Boy, it has to be 10 or 11 years ago, before most people had heard of her, when she was still just, a professor who hadn't gotten in too much trouble, though she obviously rankled some people then. I believe it was called Disrobing the Aboriginal Industry. And she called it the Indian industry. There is a large subcategory of senior bureaucrats, contractors, lawyers, and this is the people outside of the reserves. But they're making incredible amounts of money from these endless challenges, these endless settlements, these endless compensations being made. And they don't want it to be settled, anything to be settled permanently. Never mind the next level down, when you do get chiefs and councils who might not be managing the assets they garner for the sake of the whole reserve. So the corruption runs all the way down. There, okay, see, somebody put it there, disrobing the Aboriginal industry. Thank you, Laura. Yeah. So my memory isn't totally shot. Great. But it's a great book. And she really exposes a lot of that. There's layers and layers of people, very big vested interest in keeping the conflict up, keeping the settlements endless, and it never stops. I mean, just back to the residential schools for a second. People forget that there was only 150,000 students ever attended those over the course of nearly 100 years. Yet you talk to most Indigenous activists, and they claim that they got 5 or 6 direct family members who attended these residential schools. The math isn't jiving here.
No, there wasn't that many people.
No, and likewise, but something that happened is then they started saying, well, we're day school survivors. Day school survivors. So what's that? The kids who went to school. Survivors. Check it out. They call themselves day school survivors because they went to day schools on the reserves. In other words, they went to school and they got compensated for it. And they call themselves survivors. This victimhood industry. And the settlements that went to the day school survivors, well, they didn't just come about with a quick check. Some lawyers made themselves 7 figures fighting and negotiating and bringing all that about. And then, of course, they take a percentage of that settlement and it all goes down. This never stops. And it has to come to an end. We can't afford to keep
buying votes. Buying votes. Well, we have some work to do, folks, and it's not going to be easy. There's people out there that are sticking their necks out, and I mean really sticking their necks out. Watch the video of what happened to Frances Widdowson in Winnipeg. It was like sickening. And what's even worse to me is that there wasn't any men who stood up for her. This woman was accosted and like physically, I guess, assaulted by grown giant men, pushed around, thrown stuff on her. Like, it was absolutely hideous. And do you know why that happened, folks? It's because she's telling the truth. And in this case, this truth, people don't want to hear it because they've already made an emotional decision based on the propaganda that we've been spoon-fed for years, that has put up biases in their own minds that preclude the truth. That's the reality. So Francis Widdowson, Dallas Brody, Jim McMurtry, right now they're traveling all over the place, and they're saying, hey, look, this is the truth. And these aren't just people who are, it's not like me who's just read a little bit and looked at the treaties. I mean, these people have lived this and researched this for years, for decades, and they're trying to tell the truth. It's important to support it, even though it's scary right now, because we all know what happens when we tell an inconvenient truth in the public forum, right? We get attacked. Look at young Josh Alexander. He told the truth in Calgary, and some dude dressed up like a woman tried to beat him up. It was disgusting. But these are some of the things, some of the burdens we're going to have to bear if we want the truth to start setting people free. I think
so. Yeah. I mean, it's frightening. The truth is supposed to set people free, but the battle's far from finished. So, they're really closing ranks on people like Francis and Jim and Dallas, and we can't let that happen. They need support too, just to shout out to other people, even if it's an email, a thumbs up, or whatever it might be, because they're going through a hell of a lot. It must have been frightening. I mean, I've met Francis a number of times. She's, just a diminutive, upper middle-aged lady, to be polite. This is not a big burly person who can take that sort of abuse and intimidation. Yeah. And I'd have been terrified amongst the gang of thugs that surrounded her in Winnipeg. Not that I'm a big guy, but I'm bigger than Francis. Her courage is something else. I mean, she didn't stop at Winnipeg. She still keeps going. But she and others are going to get tired. They're going to become frightened, and they need support. And I really, people, I just said, just tell your audience, just give them a thumbs up when you can. It means a lot to people when they sometimes wonder, am I doing this for no reason? Am I just throwing myself out there if on a lost cause? Because they really need that support. I appreciate what they're doing.
Yeah, and so do I. We've only got a few more minutes here, folks. We're just over an hour. So if you have any questions, please put them up right now. I've gone through the comments. There's a lot of comments, but it's mostly statements. Lots of people saying, thanks, Cory, for doing what you do. Same to me. Lots of people agreeing. I haven't seen I haven't seen any questions. So we're going to go another maybe 5 minutes, 7 minutes at the most, and we'll try and get your questions. So now's the time to put them up. There is one question on there. Let me find it. One of the most important questions I've ever seen in my life. Where is it? I can't remember, but somebody with a fake name asked, who bought your restaurant for you, Chris? Well, I've sold 2 houses to inject money to keep the Whistle Stop going because I'm stubborn like that. During the COVID, what am I allowed to say that word on TV now? Can we say it again, or are we going to get banned? I don't know how it works. But during the excitement time, people actually, they raised just about $160,000 for me so that I could put a down payment on the restaurant and get it out from the title holder so that the government would stop harassing her. And of course, I took a lot of heat for that. People were asking me for weeks and months, why don't you do a fundraiser? Because everyone was doing GoFundMes back then. I didn't want that to get in the way of what I was trying to do, but I ran up against a brick wall. I did that. People stepped up and they helped me. And you know why they helped me, folks? Because I was telling the truth and I was sticking my neck out to do it. And I was taking a lot of flack, and people stood up and they supported me. And now here I am 4 years later, five years later. No, my restaurant's not paid off. I got enough for a down payment. I got my a better mortgage, but no, I do not own my restaurant outright. It's I got just enough to continue going because I was telling the truth. And I bring that up. Normally I wouldn't answer a question like that because I know it's just just some keyboard bonehead who thinks they know everything. But I want people to understand that sometimes when you stick your neck out and you feel alone and you're doing something scary, just do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. And people will stand with you. They will see you and they'll support you just like they did with me. So when you see Francis Widdowson and Dallas Brody and Jim McMurtry are going to be in an area speaking, go and listen. If not, just to be there and show your support. buy their books, help them out. I mean, a lot of these people, they've been fired from their jobs because they told the truth. They've sacrificed a lot, and we need to show them that we might not be able to do those same things in that capacity, but we sure as hell can make sure that they don't have to eat ramen noodles for the rest of their life by, we can buy their books, send them a few bucks and help them out. Super, super important stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't disagree. As I said, that's part of what I was talking to. Even if a person doesn't have a few bucks or can't make it out, even just a note now and then with an email just saying, hey, I love what you do. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And carry on. It helps. It really does. Lets them know there's people out there paying attention who do appreciate it.
Bingo. There is one question here. Ellie asks if the courts can stop independence. And my view on this is the only court that would even consider intervening in something like this would be the Supreme Court. But one of the reasons why Alberta wants to be out from Confederation, we don't want a court that doesn't represent us being the ultimate authority on matters going on here. For instance, our premier wanted kids to get the right to education, teachers' right to go back to work, parents' right to have their lives back to normal. So they passed a bill saying teachers get back to work. And they said, no, sorry, Supreme Court, you're not going to intervene. We're going to use the notwithstanding clause if you try, because that's our constitutional right. And they did it again to protect children. We don't want to have to do that at all. So the idea of an independent Alberta is no mommy and daddy Supreme Court. We are going to manage our affairs here in this province to the benefit of our people. What do you think, Cory?
Yeah, I mean, and particularly towards the pursuit of the independence, I mean, it's possible the courts can delay us. They can mess things up. People want to run things through it, which I think we should just pretty much ignore at this point. But that's my view. I'm not the one who can.
Or in court today.
Things. Yes, and if they rule against the ability to hold that, it'll be very interesting because I don't think Quebec's going to take that very well. Canada should be just as concerned when Alberta gets upset as when Quebec does, but we know realistically they sit up and pay attention when Quebec gets angry. And you know what Quebec would do with such a ruling? They say we don't care, and we've got to emulate that. We don't care what the court says, and the referendum can be held without the court's permission. That's where we're going to start putting pressure on our provincial government if the courts get in our way at that point. And I'm still very supportive of Premier Smith, and I'm critical of her in other areas. I like to put it as, I think of it as productive pressure, at least from my point of view. But that's when the pressure needs to start coming on. Okay, schedule a referendum with that question. Quit wasting time with these courts because it's up to Albertans and nobody else.
Yeah. Just a little sidetrack here. I've grown quite affectionate towards the people of Quebec in the last little while. I just learned just recently in the early 80s when the Constitution was repatriated and we ended up with the Constitution Act 1982, Quebec actually passed a bill that said they were going to use the notwithstanding clause for every single piece of federal law that came out. And so they used the notwithstanding clause like 300 times. Everything. Yeah. Nope, we're not going to listen to you. No, we're not going to listen to you. And I think of that that's absolutely fantastic. That is what sovereignty is. No, we're going to do it ourselves. We're capable. We're grown-ups. Leave us the hell alone. So Quebec, kudos to you. Fantastic stuff.
Oh, yeah, we got to quit getting mad at them and start learning from them.
Exactly. I 100% agree. Well, it doesn't seem like there's any questions. Lots of comments. Lots of people saying thank you, Cory, and I would like to express my thanks as well. I know you're a busy guy, so I appreciate it when you take some time for a little burger flipper / waitress from rural Alberta. It means a lot to me. So thank you very much.
I appreciate the invite and the opportunity to babble at your audience there. And I love the work you do too, Chris, and those Alberta Day celebrations and gatherings have been fantastic. Hope you're maintaining your energy out there.
Yeah, I think next year is going to be bigger. Yes, folks, we are going to do another July 1st celebration. It's going to be bigger and better than ever. And, I'll probably get in trouble, but that's kind of my thing. So.
Right.
All right. Again, folks, if you haven't already, check out Cory's book. It is available on Amazon and in print or audiobook. And actually, Cory narrated the audiobook. So I had the pleasure of listening. Wasn't that you?
That wasn't me. No,
Oh, it was on
no,
fast
Graham
forward. It
wasn't.
sounded like you.
Oh, well, no, he had a good likeness, but I can't take the credit for that. I started trying actually, and it was way too awkward to try and get it right, so I went to a professional for that.
Okay. Well, regardless, I listen to all my audiobooks on like double speed or 1.5 because I don't have much time. So do it. Better to buy the book and read it, because then holding something in your hand is a little bit different. I think you absorb the information better. And if you need to know things about Alberta independence or the history of the independence movement, that's your book. And yeah, thanks again, Cory. I'm going to sign off now and do a little preparation for tomorrow night, 8 p.m. with Jim McMurtry to talk about what really is the conversation about residential schools, kind of along the lines of what Cory and I were talking about tonight. And then we'll see if we can get Dallas Brody and Francis Woodison on after. And yeah, I guess that's all for tonight. Thank you, Cory. We'll see you at the next big thing.
You bet.
Good night. Well, there we go. 1 hour and 10 minutes. I think that's a record. Lots to think about, lots to go over. I would encourage you to come back tomorrow and listen to what Jim McMurtry has to say. That guy, when you hear his story, you're not going to believe the things that man has gone through simply for saying truth, for speaking truth. Like, unreal. You're not going to want to miss it. So tomorrow, 8 p.m. Also, I've been very hard at work on my web store. So has my sister. Thank you, sister. I have a ton of cool Whistle Stop branded and Alberta branded products there now. They're all available. They ship pretty darn quick. You get them pretty quick. It's a very smooth web store transaction. If you like what we're doing, if you love the Whistle Stop like I do and like so many others do, please get yourself some Whistle Stop merch. Wear it proudly. I also did up some cool little Christmas tree ornaments that have my face on them. You know that picture of me where I'm standing in front of the Whistle Stop, like in my Stronger Together hat? Yeah, I would encourage you, buy a handful of those and bring them to places where you know the people don't like me. And just quietly put one on their Christmas tree while they're not looking. And just wait and see what happens. I think it'd be hilarious. Maybe there's a Christmas tree at the mall and you can put my face on there. I love the idea of people who don't like me having to look at my face. Makes me feel great. So I'd appreciate it if you'd help me out with that. And it is www.whistlestoptruckstop.ca. It's quite a mouthful, but so is our food. And once you try it, you'll want some more. So see ya at the Whistle Stop Cafe or tomorrow, 8 p.m. with Jim McMurtry. Night, folks. Meow. Stop being scared to speak the truth. People didn't give their lives so we could cower in fear when lies are attacking us from either side. Grow some balls.